They say evil doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, hides in plain sight. In a quiet neighborhood of northeastern Pennsylvania, a man lived next door who buried more than just bad debts. He buried bodies. This is Human Wreckage. I'm Thomas, and today we examine the horrifying case of Hugo Zelensky, robber, home invasion suspect, and convicted double murderer whose backyard became a cemetery. This episode, we will trace the arc of Zelensky's life, how he turned from bank robber to graveyard operator, the night of the home invasion that unleashed a chain of bodies, the trial and the questions that still haunt investigators, what compels a man to bury human remains in his own yard, and how did the locals walk past the graveyard next door without knowing it? Let's begin. To understand the darkness, we often look for its seeds. For Hugo Zelensky, born in Pennsylvania in the early 1970s, the seeds were scattered among crime and ambition. Little is publicly documented about his childhood. What we know is that Zelensky first came to law enforcement attention in the 1990s. In 1994, he was convicted of a bank robbery. According to court filings, this was not a spur-of-the-moment act. It appears part of a pattern. After his release, Selenski drifted back into serious crime. In 2003, he was charged with a home invasion and robbery. Even at this stage, investigators believe he was cultivating a network of violent crime, one that included drug deals, robberies of drug dealers, and extortion. The leap from bank robbery to murder may seem dramatic, but it was a logical extension of a life already steeped in fearless risk. Why does someone escalate? You can imagine. Money, dominance, fear. For Zelensky, what followed suggests something deeper than mere financial gain. In the early 2000s, Zelensky's criminal portfolio expanded. Investigators described a pattern: targeting drug dealers, obtaining large quantities of money or drugs, then burying troublesome witnesses. For example, in 26, charred remains of suspected drug dealers were found on Zelensky's property, but he was acquitted in those cases. It was the missing couple case that thrust him into the national spotlight. Enter Michael Krakowski, a pharmacist under joint scrutiny for operating an illegal prescription drug ring, and his girlfriend, Tammy Fassett. In May 2002, they vanished from Krakowski's home in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Investigators believe that Zelensky and at least one accomplice forced their way into Krakowski's house, beat him to reveal the hiding place of money, then strangled him and Fassett. Their bodies were interred in Zelensky's backyard. Details are chilling. One prosecutor described how Krakowski was tortured to reveal tens of thousands of dollars he kept at home, and that flex ties were used to strangle both victims. Consider the audacity of the crime: a home invasion, torture, murder, and then burial on your own land. That kind of impunity speaks to either hubris or a deeply disturbed mind. In Zelensky's case, investigators found at least 5 sets of human remains on his property near Wilkes Barre, some of them charred, some unidentified. One media account says there may have been up to 12 victims, which raises a grim question. Was the Krakowski case simply the tip of the iceberg? May 2002, Michael Krakowski and Tammy Fassett vanish. Initial investigations yield little. It's more than a year before authorities dig up Zelensky's yard and uncover what investigators called a garden of bones. In June 2003, under a search warrant, detectives unearthed decomposing remains on the land owned by Zelensky near Wilkes Barre. Among them were the bodies of Krakowski and Fassett, beaten and strangled. At least 3 other sets of human remains were also located, 2 of them victims linked to suspected drug deal robberies, their bodies charred and buried. 1 victim remained unidentified. From court records, Zelensky has spent most of the last 20 years in prison, with convictions for a 1994 bank robbery, a 2003 home invasion and robbery, and now murder. In 26, he beat 2 other homicide charges in the deaths of 2 suspected drug dealers, whose charred remains were also found in his yard. The 5th body found on the property was never publicly identified. This discovery changed everything. The property became crime scene central. Investigators scrambled to identify remains. Bodies were exhumed and forensic teams labored to link each set to a missing person. An interesting sidebar. At the time of the murders, Krakowski was about to be sentenced for running an illegal prescription drug ring. It's believed that Selenski targeted him precisely because of his large stash of money and drugs. What's particularly gruesome is the method of disposal. Some remains were charred, suggesting attempts to obliterate evidence. Others simply buried. Investigators described the pattern as kill and bury, and the killer seemed comfortable operating from his own backyard. The local community was stunned. As one survivor's son wrote after the verdict, "I will never have my father back. Maybe now there can be closure and justice for my family." But closure was far from certain. The wheels of justice turned slowly in this case. In 23, while awaiting trial on homicide charges, Selenski made headlines with an escape from the county lockup. He fashioned a rope out of 12 bed sheets, climbed down, and was free for 3 days before turning himself in. That brazen escape added to his notoriety and cast a stark light on how he operated. Bold, unafraid, willing to break rules. Yet even while behind bars, he was linked to yet more crimes. The first murder trial ended in his acquittal. He was tried for the murders of 2 suspected drug dealers whose charred remains were found on his property, but was not convicted in those cases. In 2015, after years of legal limbo, a jury convicted Selenski of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the killings of Krakowski and Fassett. The jury spared him the death penalty, instead sentencing him to life without parole. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution described a man who has repeatedly used fear and lies and pain and death to obtain material things. From one news article, the defense tried to cast Selenski as a good father, brother and uncle even behind bars. 2 of Selenski's daughters and 4 of his sisters spoke of their love for him, calling him an intelligent and caring man. That dichotomy, family man versus graveyard butcher, is hard to reconcile. But even after the conviction, many questions remained unanswered. How many bodies were on that property? Were there victims who were never identified? And was he responsible for other disappearances? Reports suggest he may be linked to as many as 12 victims on that one property. The case also highlights systemic failures. Slow forensic turnaround, delayed indictments, suspects walking free for years. Here are the questions that still haunt this case. How many victims did Selenski really have? Some investigators and insiders believe the number could be significantly higher than the 5 publicly confirmed. Who was the unidentified body found on the property? Some remains have never been matched to missing persons. Was Selenski connected to the disappearance of Cindy Song, the Pennsylvania college student who vanished after a Halloween party in 2001? Some informants suggest so, though no charges have been filed. How did he operate for so long without detection, burying bodies in his yard, multiple murders while engaged in other crimes? And what changed in the justice system that allowed a conviction more than a decade after the initial disappearances? Beyond the questions, the legacy is chilling. For the families of victims, though still unaccounted for, the storyline is one of slow justice, lingering pain. For the community, the memory, a quiet suburban setting, a man next door whose lawn hid a graveyard. In a local editorial titled, "Stop Idolizing a Murderer," the newspaper wrote, "We saw this sort of idolization of a killer locally. People became fans and supporters. Some fell for his boyish charm." It speaks to another dimension of true crime, how figures like Selenski can capture attention, sometimes dangerously so. But perhaps the biggest takeaway? No matter how quiet the neighborhood, evil can be present, and the work of uncovering it often depends on persistence, tip lines, forensic science, and sheer luck. As we close this episode, I want you to remember a few things. A man who began with bank robbery, escalated through home invasion and extortion, and ended with bodies buried in his own backyard. A community unsettled. Families are still searching. Evidence that lingers. For the survivors and the missing, justice may have come for some, but not for all. The bones remain in the ground. The questions remain in the air. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, watch the shadows, and remember, sometimes the wreckage we leave behind speaks louder than the ones we see.